My Lords, I think this has been a hugely interesting and terribly important debate, and I'm now going to take what you might describe as the traditional Green role of going much further than anyone has gone before in seeking to deliver what the noble Lady Baroness Hayman said in introducing this group, seeking to have free and fair elections, that is what I think we're all aiming for. Before I do that, I think perhaps I should, given the direction the debate in Group 1 today took, declare in retrospect my position as Vice Chair of the LGA, and apologies for not doing that earlier. Vice President, sorry. I'm going to restrict myself to just, given the hour, commenting on Amendments 212A and 212B, which appear in my name, although they do obviously bear some relationship with 212DA in the name of the noble Lord Stunnell, which goes in a similar direction, but in a more limited way. And like many noble lords, I'm drawing particularly on the 13th report of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, titled Political Party Finance, Ending the Big Donor Culture, which is what my amendment seeks to do. So Amendment 212A amends the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act to set a donation cap of £500 from any individual donor or corporation to each party or candidate, either with a single donation or cumulatively by multiple donations through a calendar year. Now, I will note that Clause 1.2 specifically excludes trade unions from that cap, which I think deserves some explanation, for which I'll turn to the Green Party Policies for a Sustainable Society, which, to quote, says, "Donations from democratic membership organisations such as trade unions provide a useful method for ordinary people to pool resources in order to exert influence," close quote. Now, I think it could be argued that there may be other organisations similar to that. I think of perhaps the RSPB, for an example, that might choose as a group to give a larger donation. But the practical reality is that most of those are charities, and our charity law means that's not practically going to be an issue. And I would also like to acknowledge that there is a potential flaw in the way that this amendment is written, and certainly needs some more work, in that it does allow a donor to give £500 potentially to every single candidate, which would obviously come to a very large sum of money, which is not the intention of the amendment. This was done because the donation rules apply separately to parties and to individual candidates. But I think this is something that I will work on in terms of this amendment. But with that proviso, this is an amendment that could truly revolutionise our elections, indeed go a long way to making the United Kingdom a democracy. For currently, very large donations are a major factor, perhaps a deciding factor, in our elections and other votes. If you go to the dictionary definition of an oligarchy, it's a small group of people having control of a country or organisation. I might add party. There's a strong case for saying that that fits the UK better than the definition of a democracy. Perhaps that's always been the case, but certainly now, since we now have a situation where technology allows huge online spending to reach voters in a targeted way, far more than anyone using up their shoe leather to knock on doors and deliver leaflets possibly could. Now, I'm not really expecting the government to say, yes, we want to transform our elections and make them wonderfully democratic and set a £500 maximum donation limit in a year. But I do have a real question which I would very much appreciate an answer from the noble Lord the Minister about. Because I note that responding to the Committee on Standards in Public Life report in 2011, the then coalition government said, quote, "The amount any one individual organisation or institution can give in political donations should be limited," close quotes. So I would ask the noble Lord the Minister, does the government accept that there should be a limit, whatever that limit is, on how much one organisation or individual can give? Should it really be the case, as there is now, that there is no limit? Now, I note that political parties' spending is capped at £30,000 for each constituency that contests in a general election. So if a party stood a candidate in each of 650 UK constituencies, its maximum spend would total £19.5 million. And indeed, I'm indebted to the library for some very rapid research this afternoon. The figures yet haven't actually been fully published, but it would appear that the Conservatives spent $16.5 million in the 2019 election, not very far off that figure, and about the same from the published figures from 2017. So that might seem to be a kind of limit. One donor could fund an entire general election campaign. But of course, that spending only covers the regulated period and only the regulated spending, which is far from what everything political parties spend. Funding outside election periods would, so far as I can see, be utterly unlimited. Now, lest you think I'm talking in terms of theoretical possibilities here, you might want to look across the Channel to the United States of America, whose political direction, for many ills, we very often follow. A useful report last year, produced by Issue One, a non-partisan group that seeks to reduce the influence of money in politics, totalled some of the contributions from what it called mega donors: multiple Wall Street billionaires and investors, a Facebook co-founder, a shipping magnate, and an heir to a family fortune dating back more than a century. And if you look at those figures, at the top of the list is Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, who spent $1.3 billion US dollars, which is about £1 billion. Of that, $1 billion went towards his own failed campaign for president in 2020. Now, this is a pattern that we're increasingly seeing around the world, where money can buy you the politics you want, or at least you can certainly make a very good effort at it. And it seems the natural conclusion is to buy yourself or the party created or reshaped in your own image office. In my native land, the United Australia Party has said that in the forthcoming federal election, it plans to spend more than it did in 2019, when the figure topped 80 million Australian dollars, which is about £45 million. It was previously known as the Clive Palmer's United Australia Party and the Palmer United Party, and it was formed and overwhelmingly funded by the mining magnate Clive Palmer. Now, I'd be very interested with anyone's answer to the question of why people should be able to buy the politics they want, why we should be in a situation where people can make serious efforts to buy control of a whole country, because that's what's happening, and we have nothing in our law to stop that happening. Now, a lot of our discussion in this group up to now has focused on foreign money in politics, and we've heard many powerful accounts of why that should be so. Indeed, when we note that the wife of President Putin's former Deputy Finance Minister, a British citizen and acting legally, has donated almost £2 million to the Conservative Party since 2012, making her the largest female donor in history. But I think that's really only very partially addressing this issue if we focus on foreign donors. Why should anybody, whatever their resident status or citizenship history, be able to buy our politics? If they're a business person or an inheritor of family wealth, surely they're likely to be influencing politics in the direction of maintaining that wealth. But why should they be able to do that? I'm sure there's many a nurse tonight struggling very hard to do his best for his patients in the NHS who'd love to influence our politics to improve its resourcing. And a farmer, she might have very strong thoughts about the direction of UK trade policy and its impact on food, health and environmental standards. And a family carer, struggling along on £87 a week allowance, might have strong views on the adequacy of that. Why should their voice be any less than anyone else's? So I was discussing this amendment with a member of your Lordship's House, who I won't identify because it was a private conversation, but they exclaimed that I think the tone could be best described as horror. But we couldn't run an election on that. You might guess they weren't from the Green Party. But I'd imagine your Lordship's House to consider a different kind of election. one based on passion, ideas, commitment and genuine engagement with the public, rather than a continual bombardment, endlessly from every media source, of slogans, probably consisting of 3 words, as a replacement for actual politics and policies. But perhaps, and I do understand, there are some ways of reaching voters that quite reasonably do cost money, leaflet production, video production. So I would agree that this amendment to 212A does imply state funding for political parties. We collectively get the politics that we fund. If we all paid for politics, it would be our politics. What a refreshing idea. But I think we're going to get to those points in Group 9 with the very interesting amendment from the Noble Lord Seeker, so I'll leave my comments on that to them. But I do also, somewhat more briefly, want to address Amendment 212B, which is rather more technical, and there will be people in your Lordship's House who know a great deal more about this than I do, and I'd be very interested in their comments. But this amendment would revive Section 68 of the PPERA, requiring declaration of multiple small donations by an individual which total £5,000 or more in any one year to be declared. Now, the figure of £5,000 is what was used in Section 68 of the PPERA originally. Now, I'm bringing this amendment because when I had some experts looking at the donation rules for 212A, we realised that Section 68 of the PPERA had been repealed, but neither our team nor the House of Lords Library could find any justification recorded for the repeal. It does not seem to have been discussed in any parliamentary debates. Now, it ought to be revived, I would suggest, because of the online nature now of many political donations. It's possible and easy to make many small donations that could total one very large figure. Perhaps this sounds theoretical, but a person could donate £1 billion by 1 billion donations of £1. None of those donations would have to be declared to the Electoral Commission, and none of the verification that is done with larger donations would have to be made. I would suggest that is obviously wrong. Now, there's been some questions asked about recent elections donations. I'm not going to go into those, but I think there is a clear risk here that I've identified. Indeed, I would say that both of my amendments identify some very clear risks that really do have to be addressed.